Welcome to Straight Talk Soundboard, which is both a sounding board for senior technology executives to try out ideas, share their professional insights with industry peers, but also a soundboard to amplify those insights and ideas to a broader audience. I'm Paul Hemp, the editor-in-chief of Straight Talk Publications and Events at HCL Technologies. And we have today with us three distinguished technology executives to talk about some of the positive opportunities that may have resulted from the professionally challenging and certainly humanly tragic coronavirus pandemic. For example, has it produced some possibly new approaches to innovation or forced some new approaches to innovation, been as a catalyst for that? Has it in any way helped accelerate digital transformation? We think of it as kind of an unmitigated negative, but we're looking to see if there may be some silver lining in what is undoubtedly a dark cloud that's been over society and business for the last months. So before we jump into the conversation, let me introduce our three panelists. Our first guest is Manesh Patel, who is a Senior Vice President and CIO at Sanmina Corporation, which is a major provider of electronics manufacturing solutions in the electronics manufacturing services sector. Our next guest is Manju Jalali, who is Vice President and CIO at Global Foundries, the leading specialty semiconductor foundry. And actually, Manju is joining us today from Singapore. I failed to mention that Manesh is joining us from Silicon Valley. And our third guest is joining us from Northern Virginia, and that is Anil Ganjoo, who is a Corporate Vice President at HCL Technologies, who heads up the business for a number of verticals, including high technology. And he brings an interesting perspective to the conversation based on the contact he has with a variety of companies who are going through similar sorts of things that all of us are, but can share some of the insights he's had from his work with them. Longer biographies of the panelists will appear at the end of the conversation. So let's dive right in, and maybe we'll just go around the circle here. But let's start off just very quickly talking about the way in which the pandemic has affected your business and also then your own responsibilities within the company. Manesh, what's it been like for you over the last 8 months?
Well, when we first started here in the U.S., mid-March timeframe, we saw shutdown orders in many states and jurisdictions. And one of the things that we had to do very quickly was transition a large number of our employees to work from home. And as many people can attest, that's a huge challenge, both from a practical technology standpoint as well as security. And
how many of we are talking about in your case, Manesh?
So before COVID, we were running probably around 700 employees anywhere around the world working from remote locations, including their homes. And then within 2 to 3 weeks, we needed to ramp to about 7,000. So a massive increase. And if you think about traditional technologies, relatively hard and slow moving in terms of scaling them up and so on. Fortunately, we've adopted some of the newer technologies, including zero trust network connectivity, that allowed us to very quickly scale up to 7,000. So that actually went very smoothly and was very successful and was recognized across the company in terms of how well that went.
Manju, what's your experience been?
I think similar to what Manish, there was so much uncertainty and it happened so quickly. What was very important was how we all responded to this, the change. It was massive. We had to really scale sometimes, overnight, because we did have situations where the borders were closed within 8 hours. And especially, for example, in Singapore, we have a large bit of employees that commute daily from Malaysia to Singapore. And had we not responded quick enough, we could have had a business continuity issue. So the reason we were able to scale quickly, the reason we were able to really deploy a remote workforce for almost 17,000 of our employees overnight was because we had already embarked on digital transformation journey. Somewhere, in January, it was a blessing. And we were able to really deploy some of these technologies like augmented reality, which helped us to manage the operations, kind of blending the virtual world with the physical world very, very quickly. So there was a lot of changes that had to happen. We had to make sure that our employees are all connected and working effectively as they used to do pre-COVID, right after the pandemic. So similar, we had to make all this happen in a week's time, not only connect our employees, but even our suppliers, because we do have it's a manufacturing operation, it's a manufacturing company. We do have regular interaction with our suppliers who come on sites to maintain our equipment. And we had to mobilize these solutions, all these digital technology solutions, very, very quickly and scale them so that we could ensure that we keep the similar levels of business continuity.
So I actually want to hear from both of you again a little bit in a minute. With once you got people geared up remotely, what sort of challenges continued? But Anil, why don't you tell us, what have you heard from your clients and companies you work with on, maybe kind of two ends of the spectrum of what their experience has been, both good and relatively, bad and maybe relatively seamless.
Yeah, so I think my experience is that, in one end of the spectrum, we work with the technology firms. And I guess the advantage of being a technology firm is they're very comfortable with technology and they kind of eat their own dog food also. So for them, it was much easier a journey, relatively easier in terms of coming on board from working remotely. But then there definitely are firms on the other end of the spectrum, which were, let's say, retailers, right, or even entertainment firms, hospitality, where they just were not able to. So it did take them a lot more time to really move to the end of spectrum of building and rebuilding their business in this new normal model. And so it obviously also depends a lot on the number of employees. And Paul, as you know, in HCL, we had to do this for 150,000 people.
It's almost unimaginable.
It was, if you ask me, it's probably the most craziest experience. And I mean, if I knew this, I would have asked my boss for a 3x compensation, because even 24 hours in the day wasn't enough for, humanly possible for. So really, I think a lot of us had to take on 2 roles, 3 roles, such that we can really bring it back to as soon as possible. I mean, being a services company. So really, I think what I saw was a lot of organizations really were able to come up very quickly. And that was because I think they also they all work with best-in-class internal organizations of technology and external organizations, Manju referred to as partners, suppliers also, which really ensured that business, comes first in trying to bring it up to speed and running it ASAP.
Any of you, this is what I just mentioned a minute ago, but do you face constraints once you've got everybody organized of, your 7,000 or 15,000 or 150,000? Once people were in place and set up remotely, what sort of other constraints have you faced, or do you continue to face in trying to do your own, make your own strides forward?
Yeah. So we had roughly 7,000 employees working from home, and about 30,000 in our factories. So we have over 60 factories around the world. So we still had our factories operating. And clearly, one of the biggest challenges we faced early on was as different jurisdictions around the world went into lockdown at different times. Remember, this didn't happen all at the same time. So it was definitely a time phase, country by country, or even province or state by state. We had to very closely monitor our supply chains. And so our business is really manufacturing, and it's a manufacturing service that we provide to our OEM customers. And so we have hundreds of customers and literally tens of thousands of suppliers around the world. So as different suppliers around the world had to shut down or reduce capacity, that dramatically impacted many of our factories around the world and customers. So if you think about that problem statement, for anybody who likes math, it's an n squared, or it's an n to the power of n problem, which is you got n customers and n x suppliers. You've got to do that calculation, which says the combinations are incredible. So we had to very quickly understand what was going on with our suppliers and our customers, because our customers' demand was changing pretty dramatically on a day-to-day basis, especially some of our medical customers. So that problem statement of the complexity and the speed at which we needed to move to address the changes really, really stretched our organizations, our systems, and our data. And so if we look at all of those things in combination, it was an extremely challenging time for several months, I would say, as we started to come to terms with all of those challenges.
Let's just stick with you for a second there. So was there anything besides the tremendous immediate and day-to-day demands of trying to make that transition, looking back even from this relatively short distance in time, were there any learnings that came out of that might prove useful when the pandemic has passed?
Absolutely. So I'll give a specific example here. We had a period where some of our suppliers in Malaysia were shutting down, and when we did the analysis to say, if we look at the parts those suppliers were providing, which plants around the world were using those parts for which customer programs, and we did all that analysis. There's a lot of data elements that need to be in that calculation, and the data really belongs in different silos. So some of it's in supply chain, some of it's on the customer side, some of it's in our manufacturing plants, and connecting all those data elements was quite difficult. It was in terms of being close to real time. So that's one of the lessons learned is, making sure all of our data is in one place that we can really analyze it effectively and close to real time, and then making sure that data is updated on a timely basis, because out-of-date data doesn't help you. So looking at that end-to-end data element was really hard to do initially, and then as we got better at it, it became a lot easier.
And does that have benefits that carry over into the present or the near future?
Absolutely, and so we're now utilizing that data for more real-time analysis and doing different types of analysis. And that's definitely helping. We're still in the pandemic, but as changes happen, and they're happening right now, we're able to respond to those much faster.
Manju, talk a little bit about what sort of challenges you faced once you got your workforce relatively stabilized and in place.
I mean, I think the entire industry was grappling with this issue. It caught everyone by surprise, and things moved so quickly. I would think that the response, everyone had to put in order to react as quickly as possible to make sure that things are still operational. We had similar supply chain issues, and there was I would say that initially there was a slowdown, but then things caught up, because if you look at our industry, we are in the semiconductor industry.
Right.
You're doubling down on digital transformation. Every company wants to head that way, because that's the only way that you can sustain and continue your operations. And there was a huge spike in the demand. I think obviously everyone was putting on a creative hat and coming up with solutions of how to address this common problem. Your supplier ecosystem, they came in together. In fact, even within the IT, we had issues of having our laptops available, because overnight everybody was working home, and we didn't have enough of stock on hand available for us. So we had to again find creative ways to ship it from our other sites, use what was in the existing inventory levels, all kind of ways to make sure that our employees are able to work, and they not only do they stay connected, but they have the required devices that are needed for them to be operational. So number of issues, but I would think majority of the companies have done very well, and it has it's slowly turning into a new norm, because it's probably going to be how you're going to operate moving forward. There's a lot of learning in the process, because number one is that we what it has taught us that digital transformation is not just a hype, right? It's a reality. If you're not there, you may not even be relevant as a company. You cannot survive. Second is that not only now that you don't have to spend time in convincing your stakeholders that, hey, this is the way to go, this is where we should be headed, but it's more about how can you accelerate, how can you do things faster, how can I get it tomorrow. Now that's a new challenge that we are grappling with. How do we really scale these technologies as quickly as possible, so that we can see the benefits, not only in terms of the values, but even from a sustainability standpoint. So these are the learnings that are coming in on a daily basis, and I think as we are learning, we are course correcting. So for example, you used to have most of the employees working on site, and for a manufacturing industry, it was it was like you had to be on site. But what this pandemic has taught us, that even in operations where where there was a misnomer that person has to be physically on site in order for things to work, actually you can have you can even do those kind of operations, manage it remotely with all the technologies that you have in place. So, and that's why we are constantly looking at the practices, looking at how we can course correct and take these learnings and adopt it to the new way of working, in post-pandemic. So a lot of learnings along the way. And every day we are, taking those learnings and applying it to how we will come back after the post-pandemic. It's not going to be the same as it was when we were hit with the pandemic in the beginning.
Can you think of, and this may be taxing, specific memory too much, but when there was that realization, or the requirement and realization that people didn't necessarily need to be on site for manufacturing, at least certain aspects of it. Can you think of a moment when that became clear, or was there a debate within the organization about whether that could be done or couldn't, and any kind of moments where the clouds cleared a bit and it became clear that's not only what you needed to do, but that you'd be able to do it?
See, it was not a question of, we didn't even have time to discuss or debate about, the options. What happened is the borders were closing overnight, right? And I just quoted an example. The Singapore and Malaysia border closed, I think there was a 48 hours window. Number one, we had to make sure that all the remote workforce, and there are about 1,000 of them that commute daily, they have the devices that are needed for them to connect to the workplace. We had to make sure we had the right bandwidths available, so that at least the productivity levels are not impaired by performance issues. And number three is that of course there was a skeletal workforce that was still in our fabs that were locally, our local employees. but there were many experts, engineers, that were now all remote. And they used to be typically always in the fabs, working with the technicians, working with specialists, doing the day-to-day operations, running maintenance, running those predictive maintenance on the tools. That's like a day-to-day operations. Now that would have kind of put the whole fab brought the whole fab to a halt. So what we had to do was we had this pilot of augmented reality, where you are actually connecting a remote expert, which could be in anywhere in the world, and actually guiding that staff in the fabs how to run your operations. Meaning, it kind of gives you a step-by-step guide of what to do, because that's all automated. It's virtual. It gives a three-dimensional view of the equipment to the remote person, and you can annotate. You can actually annotate on the picture, and the person in the fab is actually able to see what you're supposed to do from a what's the next step you are supposed to do. And if you are hitting errors, because of the AI we had used, it actually tells you where to go rather than start the process all over time. So all over again. So these are the concepts which were not yet scaled. They were just in pilot, but we didn't have time. We had to move quickly. We had to scale it. So we did have a partner ecosystem. Our product vendors, we came in together. And I think within less than a week, we deployed the solution, and it kind of became seamless experience. There was no difference between whether the expert is sitting right in front of you in the fab, or they are actually sitting thousands of miles away from you anywhere in the world. Because what happened is that once the solution became operational in Singapore, and we felt that it is really working, and you're really seeing that impact, no impact to our productivity levels, and you're working as normal, we quickly deployed it to the rest of the sites, because again, that's where the borders were shutting down. And we also applied it to our supplier ecosystem, because that's how they came into trouble. Some of these equipments are you need really specialized skills to maintain them. So that's how they started maintaining the equipment. I think, and again, the learning was, we used to have everyone traveling all the time. Was it necessary? Can we adopt this technology moving forward, for driving cost efficiencies? And it saved time as well, because when you against the manual process of running an operations based on some of the SOPs, when everything is automated, when AI tells you exactly what is wrong and where to go, and when you have things really the software that we are using, the AR, telling you exactly what to do, it saves a lot of time. It brings in a lot of efficiency into the process. And obviously, it helped us to overcome the hurdles or the challenges that we are facing. We were actually faced with, and we had to find solutions. So
it seems like
choices here.
It seems like this is something you probably were working towards anyway. If you were, part of your digital transformation, what sort of timetable do you think you would have been on, or would it have been different if there hadn't been the crisis?
So as I said, yes, these were all the concepts that we were bringing in a lot of AI, a lot of augmented reality, virtual realities, robotic process automation. They were all part of our digital transformation plan, but we had never thought that we had to not only deploy them, implement them, scale them quickly as well. So there was a project plan. It was supposed to come in regularly, probably in a 6 months time, where we could scale it company wide. And something that had to be scaled in 6 months, we had to bring it forward and deploy it in a week's time. That was, I would think that, it was stretching the teams, but I think they really, not only because it pulled the teams together, and they could, be put in all these creative ways of bringing in the scaling it quickly. But I think the good thing is that the technologies are easy enough for us to really scale them quickly as well. So I think I should give the credit to all these digital technologies that are available today, which allows us to scale them quickly as well.
Anil, I want to come to you with the same sort of question, but I want you all to. So there seems to be something, certainly that Manesh and Manju, you were saying, is that what you had thought you might be doing over a longer period. Manesh, you didn't explicitly say that, but some of this probably would have happened over time, but it happened within not only a compressed time, almost an infinitely compressed time. What sort of, and Anil, you as well, I mean, what can we take away for the lessons on scaling that come out of this? I guess one is that it's doable in a crisis, but are there other sorts of takeaways that could be applied to future efforts when there'll be a kind of a gradual scaling up in vision, but everybody would benefit if it happened more quickly?
I think from a technology perspective, Paul, in line with what Manesh and Manju is saying, things like digital transformation, things like cloud technologies, analytics, data analytics, omni-channel, e-commerce, all these have always been talked about and has always been a part of the roadmap, including as basic as, particularly with newer technologies and specifically digital technologies. Most companies have always said that let's start with more on-site, in the office, face-to-face design things, and then we will slowly transition into, the global delivery models. In our case, centers either nearshore or offshores. Everyone knows there's a cost efficiency associated with it, but whenever there is newer technologies, you kind of people want to see the teams to be working together, face to face, right next to each other on a daily, hourly basis. What's happened now is those same digital technologies is what we are dependent on really to run the business. We had no other option but to actually implement them overnight. And there was always planned, and these journeys were anyway on. And by the way, as I said, in HCL's case, you have 150,000 people. You don't know where they are, but they are today and every day executing those digital transformation programs. It doesn't matter if they are in Silicon Valley or in the India Silicon Valley.
Right.
They are executing it. They're all these IoT technologies to cybersecurity, to cloud, to digital and analytics, and which we are being held accountable for the running of the businesses of such large corporations like Sanmina and Global Foundries. So I think in my mind, sometimes adversity really pushes the best in all to come and jump ahead. That's how I see it, and it's a common theme across different industries. And more the adversity in a particular industry, the faster it is moving in terms of the transformation and adoption.
I guess what's interesting is whether, absent a crisis, whether there's anything that we've learned. I mean, it's partly a psychological question. I guess it's a change management question. A crisis makes change management easier because there's no choice really. But I guess I'm just wondering is what you're describing. I'm sure there was a downside to it as well. I mean, it wasn't done probably exactly as seamlessly as you'd hope. There was some hiccups and that sort of thing. But basically, the outcome is something that one would want to achieve in a relatively short period of time. And I'm just trying to think if going forward, if looking at these experiences, if there's anything either change management wise or technological wise that we can take forward and say, let's do this without a crisis.
Yeah, I think, Paul, and I'm going to reframe your earlier question on scaling.
Sure.
To me, it really came down to focus. And I think and in a crisis, you have to focus on what's most important and then go aggressively pursue it. And that's what we found was just bringing the right set of people together so they could all work on the same problem statement together through digital technology, video, and all of the technologies that we have with people working remotely. What we found was the technology part, I mean, as challenging as it was really more about the people and bringing them together and having them focus on a problem statement and use all of their skills and knowledge and experience to address that. And that's really where we saw a lot of benefits. And then what we're seeing now is that's continuing. As we get beyond the crisis periods, just bringing the right set of people together, having them work together. And when And the irony is when our employees were in their offices or in their factories and they're spread out all over the world, they tended to work within their own environment. And that collaboration was somewhat limited. And now that we were all forced to work and collaborate remotely, guess what? Instead of just working with the people in your office or your building, you're working with people all over the world. And that change, I think we're still learning or trying to understand how that's all working, but it's working for us, certainly. And to me, if there's some sort of lasting benefit that we are silver lining, as you mentioned, out of this crisis, I think that's it, which is our ability to work across regions and boundaries and time zones is here, right? Through this digital technology. And I think that's going to be one of the lasting legacies.
Okay.
Yeah. I think, Paul, that's a very interesting thing. It triggered a thought in my mind as Manesh was speaking. When we were experiencing this in our first week onwards, and I think in our case, our CEO was getting briefed probably a month in advance, right at the time when data was coming from China. We actually put a task force, and we were about 60 or 70 of us it started on a daily stand-up call. Then it turned to be twice a week, and even now it is once a week. These are every head of every country, head of every industry, and head of every function in the company had to commit. And being a global company, you just cannot match these time zones, which is comfortable for everyone. But
yeah, I heard about those meetings at 2 a.m. to the East Coast of the U.S.
And that happened. And of course, the CEO was on each one of them, irrespective of what time it was. And I think, to me, and the point I was trying to make, what Manesh said is, I actually, after having worked for 30 years in HCL, I met so many leaders in HCL whom I didn't know. I'm ashamed to say that. I just knew them by their names. The amount of time I've got to spend with them, understand their functions, the intricacies of their functions and their geographies. I mean, Manju was talking about every country has their own regulations, their own, aspects of lockdown that got involved and associated. I mean, take India. We've got centers in Noida. There are people who live in Delhi. There are people who live in Gurgaon. They're right next to each other, like the NCR or Washington, D.C., greater area. It's actually kind of 10, 15 miles. But there were 3 different laws implemented because they technically fall in 3 different states.
Right.
And we had to abide by each one of them to implement some devices that had to move from our global delivery centers to the physical homes of these people so that they can be working. I think this is the kind of realization that we've got, understanding, appreciation. And I think we are using all this data now to actually be prepared for any possible adversity ever.
I'm kind of intrigued by one of the things you said, Anil, and I'll ask Manesh and Manju as well, whether Manesh, you mentioned collaboration, but just getting to know different parts of the company in a way that would really ease or facilitate interactions, even if it weren't a crisis. That do you have that sense, either of you, Manju or Manesh, that certain sorts of walls were broken? Not so much walls broken down, but that there were more ties kind of created between different units or different parts of the company or different geographies?
Absolutely. And Anil's example, we have a very similar example where we have a stand-up call with senior leaders across the world at a fixed time on fixed days, and everybody shows up. And it could be 5 a.m. in the morning here in California, but that's okay. You got to show up. So it's one of those things where and you get to see and hear what others are doing, and you're learning, and just by being as part of that conversation and part of that session, you're learning so much about what the rest of the company and the executives are doing. And even outside of those sessions, you now have the ability to make those connections and share ideas, right? So I think it's a profound, and surprising, right? You'd think this is, we've all had teleconferencing for years and years and all sorts of meetings, but I think one of the lessons learned here is when there's something important, bringing all the people together and getting them focused and working in the same direction, I think is critical. And whether you're working on a small problem or a big problem, I think that's going to be the wave of the future. And because of technology, we can do that easily.
There's always been the idea that you need to get the sales force together once a year or something in person. But what we've seen is that, I guess, you can get some of the benefits of that sort of touch and feel of your colleagues, even through remote technology. And
absolutely. And instead of having a 2-day conference or a meeting, you can break it down and say, hey, we're going to have 2 hours every other day for a couple of weeks. Whatever makes sense. I mean, the mode of operation is a little different when you're in the virtual model, but you can, and then in that time span, you can focus on what's important. I think sometimes when you get into these conferences, you end up doing a lot of things that may not be adding a lot of value, right? And when your time is valuable, you got to make sure you're focused on the right things. So.
That actually is an interesting idea too, is that sometimes you're the product of a burst of small interactions with everybody, rather than one big sales, global sales conference, is maybe a way more, productive way to spend time together, not all for 2 days, but for 40 minutes and then the next day another 40 minutes or something.
Yeah.
I would like to add also that I think in every company, I wouldn't say it was different. You had a top-down kind of attention and focus on this. Task force were set up overnight, and everybody across different geographies and time zones were meeting on a daily basis to see how we were progressing to address the pandemic. And I think some of the practices as any large company or any company would have had for years, especially when you're in IT, your BCP plans, your risk management strategies, your change management strategies. I think that it was a time to test, all those strategies. Are they working, when there's a crisis and you're really deploying them? Are they working as you had expected? So that it was a time where we put those practices, those plans that we had into practice, and that all had to happen overnight. So, obviously certain things work, certain things we realized we're not, that needed to be changed, but things were moving because there was a focus, and there was a, not only the entire company came in together. I think as Manesh mentioned, the silver lining was that people were united. There was a common objective that, we have to get through this crisis. So it really brought teams together. I would think that was one of the benefits, that teams started working together, and everyone had the common objective of seeing that, we continue to maintain our operations as they were.
No, that's a good point. And I think that Manju made that, we tested our systems, our processes, and our people as we went through this. And one of the things we saw was that, people are finite, right? So you can stretch them so far, and at some point you get to breaking point. So and what we tried to do as much as possible was allow our employees to speak up and say, look, I need help, right? And then we brought additional resources to bear and so on. So I think it brought our employees together more, I think, and realized that they really are part of one team. I mean, everybody talks about being part of one team, but I think this really helped to. Now, I can imagine an environment where it can very easily go the other way, where things aren't working, you can get into finger pointing and it goes downhill very quickly. But we were able to come together where we had challenges, and we had failures as well, where things didn't go the way we wanted, and we learned from those and kept moving forward. So I think it was, from an employee standpoint, I think this, beyond the technology, and we do focus more on the technology from where we all come from, but I think the people and how they worked was really the big lesson learned here.
There was a learning every day in this process. If you look at it, yes, the teams came together globally, and I mean, we do interact on a global basis where, most of us have global responsibilities. But then here, number of employees across the levels were coming together, and it reached a point where, the lines blurred between what is your personal time and what is your office time, and that became a problem statement. There was no work-life balance. People were kind of working around the clock, and then that became a huge issue for us. How do we tell our people to define boundaries? How do you have more thoughts around, managing and maintaining your work-life balance? So a lot of learnings, and along the way, it was not so much of, coming together and address the crisis, but also making sure that we don't, change the culture in such a way that everybody is working 24 hours of the day. So fixing that, creating awareness, education, etc. They're the new things that, took a kind of a priority over some of the other things.
What you say, Manju, and what Anil said, it makes me think of something else I wasn't sure we were going to talk about. But what sort of, you all, are responsible for large teams. What sort of leadership lessons came out of it? I'm thinking particularly in the when you're talking about, both Manju, you and Anil talked about, it can either not bring out the best, but people can do well, but maybe there's a limit, and you need to realize, if the boundary between work-life balance has totally been erased, is that something we want? What's all three of you? Were there any sort of things you learned about leading your teams, or I guess that's basically it, given the demands that unusual demands that were placed on the people working in your group?
Manesh, please start.
Sure. So absolutely, and we fairly quickly figured out that many of our employees were working long hours, and they had family at home, and obviously had a life as well. So we did guide our employees and our management about that, which says, look, we want to make sure that our employees are not just working around the clock, and we provided guidance, and just simple things like, it's very easy if you're sitting in one place for a long period of time because you're just working on your laptop and so on. That's not healthy. So, moving around, taking a break, all those types of things, and we just provided some basic guidance to our employees. The other thing we also did was, it's because of the stress of work and just the type of work we were doing in terms of just everything's needed to be done very quickly. It did create stress and strain across different teams and individuals. And we did counsel our employees about, we need to be mindful of each other and to be kind to each other, because we don't know the circumstances of the person on the other end or the people on the other end. So we just need to make sure that we're treating everybody with kindness and fairness. And even if in a stressful situation or where somebody's upset, we've got to be, it's much easier to be, when somebody's sitting across the table from you, how you interact with them can be very different than how you interact with them across a screen or a phone call. And so, we want to make that experience closer to how that interaction is in person. And so we provided some guidance to our employees along those lines, and some direction. Nothing's perfect in this world, right? Things happen, and every now and then you got to go, as management, you got to go help fix things. But I think for the most part, our employees got it. They understood their own circumstances. They were talking to each other. They understood other people's circumstances, and really realized that, you know, we've got to work together, and we've got to also give each other some time and space to take a break as well.
Can any of you think about, this is going to something Anil said a minute ago, but I think you would all probably agree with, not everything worked when you were in an entirely different environment, and it's kind of a, try and test and experiment and then try again. Any things that, do you recall situations or occurrences that where a path you took just didn't work, and then what you learned from that? That's tough maybe to think of specifics, but where you realized that something you'd done wasn't going to work in, even given your best intentions, and therefore you had to rethink the approach.
So just an example of a little bit of innovation, business and technology. Our business is manufacturing electronic products for OEMs around the world, and it's a service business. So a lot of our business is based on relationships and really building a close working relationship with our customers. And before COVID, it was very common for our customers to visit our plants around the world, travel, and so on. And especially on the sales side of our business, a lot of personal interaction, visiting our plants and so on, and traveling to different parts of the world. So with COVID, our prospective customers or existing customers were not able to travel to our plants. And so after a few weeks, our sales folks started to ask our plants about, hey, could we do some sort of virtual plant tour and so on. And we're very much up for challenges, and some of our plant folks started to use their mobile devices to do a virtual plant tour, and the initial attempts were not very good, unfortunately, and very quickly we in IT were called upon to help out, and we organized some of our key folks and overcame some challenges, Wi-Fi coverage and those types of things, practical challenges, stabilization of the cameras, and those. Very quickly we were able to experiment and try out a number of things, and really started to create a pretty high quality experience for the virtual plant tours for all of the people remotely who were able to join. And so we started in one or two locations, and then we started to roll that out around the world. And that's actually been a very successful model for us in terms of engaging with our customers and our prospects. That's really enabled our sales organization to keep going.
Do you think any aspects of that will continue on when travel becomes easier, or?
Absolutely. And I was just discussing with somebody yesterday about, I think if COVID had only lasted a few weeks or a few months, it would have been very easy for us to go back to the way it was, which was, go back to travel and so on. I think because it's lasted so long, we've started to become used to this idea of working virtually and remotely. And I see this really having some legs in terms of, even in the future, we're probably going to do more of this. And if we think about it, if somebody had to travel halfway around the world and spend a few days or a week in a country to do this tour versus being able to do it in a few hours while they're sitting in their office or at home, that's a massive advantage in terms of reduced cost and efficiency. And I think this is going to really stay around as long as that experience is a quality experience. And obviously some travel will come back, but I think we're going to see a lot more of the technology-based model here.
Anil, I think, did you have a comment on, I interrupted you there on something that maybe comment you had about the
Yeah.
virtual plant tours. And
That's right. I was about to say that exactly in the same lines. In our global delivery centers, or even our customer experience center, and so many of them between Americas or Europe or Asia, and then of course in India, there's not a single day that there isn't an important customer coming and visiting. And there's so many times multiple of them, very common. I think, and yet we have seen enough number of people who actually are not able to make it, because at any point of time in a year, probably some set of people only come. So what's happening, and it's become really a normal routine in this industry business. What I think we've realized is, both for the salespeople, for customers, for our software managers, I think what we have used this mechanism is we've actually gamified and literally job stepped right from the time that one lands at the airport or at your hotel. The whole journey and experience of coming to the delivery centers, the processes of it, the customer experience center, the town hall, talking just directly to the software engineers, the work which you have done in your labs that you want to showcase. That's really what people want to, that's what they go for. They want to see, and the breadth of technologies. They want to get a sense of the culture of the teams they want to interact with directly. What we've been working on is actually basically ensuring that it's like using AR and VR technologies. They can pretty much do that, because at the end of the day, life will come back to normal. And at that time, you will have people in those centers, but physically, everyone cannot go and travel and experience that. But if we can get that glimpse or pick up a module of anything that they would want, and we are integrating it with like the equivalent of Facebook Live, where some of the interaction actually can be while you're here. Physically, you can have the town hall at a particular time, or you can have somebody from Bangalore and somebody from Silicon Valley talking about their T-Mobile experience or their Intel innovation experience. That's what we are bringing in together, which today actually doesn't happen. We kind of made it more manual, but we are now actually ensuring that these things are built to last and leveraged, so that, and actually on the other side, this whole thing is also, I'm sure Manesh and Manju can attest to it. Internally in HCL, when we are evaluating the metrics, we've got about 15% higher productivity of an output from the workforce as an outcome of all this. Now, I totally grant this point of, we are now working on ensuring that the empathy levels, the soft factors, the mental aspects, the health aspects are equally balanced, so that it's not just a one-dimensional metric that is being applied in this business. There is the software aspects, and in most of our cases, culturally also, we want to ensure it's not just the employee, but it's the whole ecosystem of the employee, which is their families, are also extremely well taken care of. And we've got tie-ups with HCL Healthcare. We're lucky to have a complete separate company called HCL Healthcare, which is tied to give that coverage. So I think these are so many aspects of this business side that really are helping us get to know our employees better. By the way, get to know their families better. Secondly, actually get a higher productivity because of this, yet actually get to train and mentor them to be focused more on work-life balance, more flexibility, as well as health issues, not just safety issues, a sustained health issue, which in the past, I don't think was that much focus, at least on a scale basis. I thought I just wanted to add that.
Go ahead, Manju, go ahead.
I can add, you are really testing the limits of what digital transformations can do. When you apply your digital transformation to hiring, onboarding, training, then you can see the limits, you can achieve. Just that nobody thought that you will ever hire or onboard a person remotely. But the pandemic kind of forced you to step out of those norms and test out what technology can really help us to achieve. It's really, and I don't think that we have really lost anything in the process, other than obviously the physical interaction, and sometimes it always helps to have that personal touch. But then your operations are not impacted, because you're even extending this transformation to see how you onboard your people, how you train, especially in manufacturing sector where your trainings can be quite complex, and it takes a long time to train a person and onboard a person. But when and considering that this has been now lasted us for more than a year and it's still not over, and you are still continuing to hire and train and onboard, it shows that the power of innovation and how you can really apply it successfully to your day-to-day work.
We say that a lot of these things will now become permanent, and that may be true. But I'm thinking of the Manesh, your deal of the sales interaction, which is traditionally a very in-person sort of relationship-based relationship. But what it may be is not one or the other, but there may be this kind of A/B testing after the pandemic. There will be in-person encounters, and there will be virtual encounters, and people will kind of be able to over time assess which is more effective or which is more effective in different situations. It's you can almost see
absolutely. There's no right or wrong answer. It's figuring out what works and how much of whether it's in person or remote work. So, I think, and we're still, my view is we're still at the early stages of learning about remote activities. And Manju mentioned a lot of them in terms of onboarding and so on.
Yeah.
But, I think as we continue down this road, we're going to learn a lot more about what we can do and what works and what doesn't work. But I think it's a huge jumpstart. I mean, we've been talking about, especially in the technology field, digital transformation for a few years now, and suddenly it's burst out into the public arena, and everybody's talking about it now and realizing the value and the benefits of it. And as that general population starts to understand what we can do, I think they're going to start applying it in various ways. So I think it's pretty exciting and somewhat scary as well of what's going to happen moving forward. But I think we're at the beginning of a new era.
Actually, Manju, let me just go back to you for a second, because you were citing those examples that were done, as Manesh just mentioned, that we're now doing virtually that we were doing in person before. Let's just take onboarding, for example. Do you see some of that virtual onboarding continuing on post-pandemic? I mean, how much of it do you think we'll keep, and how much will we jettison when in-person encounters are easier?
See, when you look at the end-to-end process of hiring to, sourcing to hiring to onboarding, training, etc., it's a long process, right? You may not necessarily do everything virtually, because right now you don't have a choice. Right. You may still have that personal touch in between, maybe when you're interviewing and all, but you could automate and virtualize parts of it, So there are a whole lot of things you can do with technology, which we had never thought possible before. It's opened up new possibilities for every one of us. And part of the process can always be virtual still, It's not that there's no longer a misnomer that it cannot be done. It is very much possible. The question is, how much of it do you want to adopt? And that's, again, something you will apply, and maybe, if it's working fine. If not, you will have always opportunities to improve. So I wouldn't think that, it will stop us not from using it, because there are endless possibilities now with transformation. It is only for us to see, to what level do we want to stretch it, and what all is possible with the digital transformation. And I think, as Manesh, you also mentioned, it's no longer just a competitive advantage. I think when we embarked on this journey a couple of years back, it was always that you want to be leaders in the space, you want to be digitally ready. Now it is more like you have to stay relevant, to survive. You have to have it. So everyone has to move in this direct journey in order to survive in the new world, because it's all going. A lot of it is going to be driven by digital technologies.
I'm just looking at the time, and I'm cognizant of your time as well. Why don't we finish up the discussion, and maybe it's one we could even continue sometime. It's pretty interesting. But let's say you're recounting your the amazing work experience to your grandchildren in 15 years, back when there was COVID-19 and everything changed, not only in life in general, obviously, but in the workplace. There were a lot of big changes. What's the first thing you think you would mention to them that was a change that both seemed radical, but that may not seem very unusual to your grandchildren 15 years from now? Is there one aspect of it that you might recount that it was a true learning from this period in your professional lives?
So, for me, we stood united. Sorry, it was like standing united, coming together, and working towards a solution. And I think while it has been extremely painful with so much of uncertainty, I would think that we should be proud of what we have accomplished in each of our organizations, and we really are winners here. So, and then the only thing I would say is because we all came in together, we were in the journey, we stood united. We not only took care of how we continue our business, going, but even from a work, employee, how we make sure that our employees are safe, taking care of each other. I think that's what I would say, that, it kind of rekindle your sense of gratitude to people and what is really important in life, what you care about most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. There's this kind of almost emotional learning that came from it. Or Manesh, thoughts of you, what you would tell when you're telling the story to your grandchildren sitting on your knee?
Yeah. So, and one of the things I would point out, and we're using it right now, is video. And I've worked long enough in technology to know that we've had different waves of video technology over many decades, and they really haven't taken off. And it wasn't so much, the technology wasn't that great early on, but a lot of it was around the people. People were not used to being in front of a camera. And now I think we've sort of broken through a lot of barriers with COVID, that everybody's using video conferencing and video technology in their professional lives, in their personal lives. Family get-togethers are virtual now. So we've just blown away that shyness factor or whatever it was, and now it's normal. And it's normal, and the technology is there where we can all use it easily at a relatively cost-effective level. And so to me, that's the big change, one of the big changes that we've seen. And yeah, 15 years from now, it's not even going to be a question. And they're going to wonder, wow, you lived in an era when the people weren't using this video thing, and you talked over phone lines and wrote letters or whatever you did.
So. Exactly. Succeeding generations backwards. Anil, any thoughts from you that there's some memorable thing that you would recount to someone years hence?
Sure. I would say 2 or 3 things really that my big takeaway for my children, grandchildren would be, I think this has definitely taught us resilience is very, very important. Sustainability and resilience is first. I think because adversity, and it was common, and obviously it's negative, I have now come across people, because we are all going through the same thing, but I'm amazed by having met so many people who actually looked, while they were experiencing the same adversity, were looking at the positiveness associated with all this and looking beyond it, and looking at whether it's on their professional world of advantages that can be created out of these situations, advantages could be competitive advantages personally or organizationally or for their teams, but something which is kind of positive so that it probably helps you to sustain and be resilient for a better future. And then that positive energy can kind of dissipates to everyone whom you interact with. I think that I have seen really has been a big difference in those people, and everyone looks up to them as leaders. Yet there is a lot of empathy associated. So leadership with a very positive approach, a futuristic approach, long-term futuristic, but with a lot of empathy. I thought I have seen and really been humbled by that in these trying times where the more senior you are, the tougher your job is, yet you have huge responsibilities and have to be leading teams with a lot of empathy. That's my biggest takeaway here.
That's a thought that everybody has expressed either explicitly or implicitly throughout this, is the kind of human empathy or human connection that has grown out of something that might seem to sever those connections. And our that connection I've made with you today is actually a warm one as well. And we're thousands of miles away, but it's been a really enjoyable conversation. So thanks so much for your time and thoughts. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure our viewers will as well have things they can take away that will be useful in their own professional settings as well. So thank you very much, Manesh, Manju, Anil. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Manesh, Manju, nice meeting you all. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.